Hi guys, I'm Erica. Welcome to Hack Your Health. Today we have another specific carbohydrate diet friendly recipe for you, and it's going to be meatballs and spaghetti squash. So obviously the main ingredient in the meatballs is going to be ground beef, and this is ground beef with 20% organ meat. So if you're looking for a way to get organ meat into your diet without actually having to eat them or know how to cook them or anything like that, this is a really easy way to get them in. Obviously the other main ingredient is going to be spaghetti squash. We're going to season it with garlic and butter, and if you don't want to use butter, you could use either ghee or you could use coconut oil. And then for the flavoring, we're going to use Parmesan cheese, which you can also include or exclude, and then different spices. So I'm going to use a bit which is just an Italian mix of spices, but then I'm also going to use fresh parsley and fresh basil, and then some thyme, and I'm also going to throw in a bit of rosemary since I have it, and an onion and salt and pepper, and eggs. Yeah, that's it for ingredients, so I'll just show you how to prepare it. Since the squash takes about 40 to 45 minutes to cook, I'm going to put that in the oven first. So first I'm just going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. And then I'm going to cut the squash in half. So for the squash, you just need to scrape out the seeds. Now you can see that the squash is emptied out, but if I scrape it, it's still going to make some little pieces like this, and those ones are fine. That's just because it's a spaghetti squash. And now I'm just going to do the same thing to the other half of the squash. I'm going to put about a tablespoon of butter in each side, and then I'm just going to add salt. So now I'm just going to put this in the oven. So now I'm going to start cutting up the ingredients for the meatballs, because the meatballs don't take as long to cook as the squash, so that's why I start with the squash. First, I'm just going to open the packages of meat into the bowl. So now I'm going to cut the onion. So you're going to want to cut the onion really small. So that's good for that side. So I'm actually just going to use 3/4 of the onion because it was a pretty big onion. So you could use one medium-sized or two very small onions would be about the same. So it looks like that now. And I'm just going to do a handful of parsley. So I cut a couple inches off the stems of the parsley just because they're dry and a lot more kind of woody or fibrous. They don't taste as good as the top part, but I'll add a little bit of these fresher, higher ends. There we go. I'll also use about a handful of basil. So this is Thai basil, that's why it's purple, but any kind of basil will be good. And for this, I'm going to remove most of the stems as well. The really small stems that are almost at the leaves are fine, but these long, thicker stems, you don't really want to eat those. They don't taste very good. Then I'm just going to finely chop this as well. And I'm also going to add 2 cloves of garlic. You can either finely chop these or use garlic press. And now the rest of it is all spices, and basically you just want to go for the Italian type seasonings. So this is just an Italian mix, and it's an organic brand with the ingredients on the label, so stay away from like garlic powder and those kinds of things that can have starch. But if it's just a leaf-based herbs and seasoning, then it's fine. I'm going to do a little bit of rosemary. I'm going to do a generous amount of black pepper. Let's say that would be like 1/4 teaspoon or so if you were to measure it. And then this is basically thyme. It just has a couple other things mixed into it, but you can just use thyme. And then, of course, we're going to add salt. So let's say the equivalent of like 1/3 teaspoon of salt, but I'm just going to sprinkle it in. I'm also going to add 4 eggs, and just so that the egg yolks and the egg whites are equally distributed, I'm just going to put them in a bowl first, and then I'm going to just whisk them up with a fork, just so that they're all mixed together. And then I'm just going to add it to the rest of the ingredients. And now I'm just going to tidy up my counter space so that I can move on to the next step of actually forming the meatballs and have the room to do that. So this is an optional step, but I'm going to add some Parmesan cheese, and I'm just going to grate it into the mix, and basically it's just for flavor. So I think this looks like about a 1/4 cup grated, and you could also do a 1/2 cup if you want to. It's really a matter of taste. It's better to mix this with your hands because you don't want to compress it. You just want to make sure it's all mixed together, but if you tightly pack the meat, then the meatballs will be really hard. So you're not trying to make a snowball. You're not trying to press it together. So first I'm just going to mix all this. So this is what it looks like all mixed together, and I have this baking tray here. I put some parchment paper on it just so that they don't stick to the pan, but you could also just use butter or some other fat to grease the pan with so it doesn't stick as well. And then I'm just going to start making these into meatballs. And once again, just kind of lightly put them together. Don't squeeze them because most meatballs have breadcrumbs in them, and the breadcrumbs kind of preserve the fluffiness of the meatball, and that's why they're in them. So these ones, since they don't have breadcrumbs, you're just going to want to be extra careful to not crush them together. Okay, so now I'm just going to put this in the oven with the squash. So the squash has been in the oven for 40 minutes now, so I'm going to take it out. And I'm just going to let it cool down for about 5 minutes or so before cutting it or before scraping it, just because it's pretty hard to do that when it's this hot. So I'm going to do an experiment with the 2 different sizes here. So I have some ones that are a bit bigger and some ones that are quite a bit smaller, and I'm going to cook these and just see which ones hold together better. And I still have quite a bit of this left, so I'll still need to do one more set on the baking pan. Now that my squash has just cooled down a bit, you can just dump the rest of the butter into the bowl, and then how you make it into the spaghetti is you just scrape it off with a fork, and it'll just go like this by itself. It's really easy. So basically it looks like this once you've scraped the spaghetti stuff off. Some of them it's harder to scrape completely out than others. I'm not sure why, but this has made a whole lot of spaghetti squash. And I'm gonna add about 3 more tablespoons of butter. 3. And I'm gonna add 2 cloves of garlic. Again, I'm gonna press the garlic because it makes it really small, but you can also cut it very finely. And I'm also going to just add salt and pepper. Gonna say that's like 1/8 of a teaspoon of pepper approximately, and maybe 1/4 or just over 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to mix that together. And since the squash is still hot, it's just going to mix the butter. You don't really have to do anything extra there. So there we are. It's all nicely mixed together. I'm just going to put it aside. Okay. And our first set of meatballs are done too. They look like they've spread out a lot more than they have because this is basically the juice from the ground beef. And this just has butter on it. But if you kind of move them, you can see that they're still in their meatball form. And they definitely smell really good. So the second batch that I made are also ready now. And I kind of made these completely different sizes in order to compare how they held together when they were like bigger and smaller, and I think that the smaller ones turned out the best. And this is more of a classic size anyways for meatballs. And then I also made some bigger ones, and they also did hold together, but I think the smaller ones are a bit more attractive looking, so I would recommend doing it like that, but they both did work.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Boink. That's good.
It's really good.
Let's try some organs.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. 10 out of 10 dentists recommend.
So that's how you make specific carbohydrate diet friendly meatballs and squash. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see more of my specific carbohydrate diet friendly meal ideas, you can subscribe for that, and more information just on the diet and on health in general. And best of luck on your healing journey. Okay, bye.